Hi, Lou Pulsifer here to talk about game quality and the kind of game you might want to make as a designer. It's been decades since I read The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, but a friend of mine says that Robert Heinlein in that book at one point says something about the nature of jokes. Funny once, funny twice, or always funny. Think about it, it's true. It's not only true of jokes, it's true of books, if you substitute worth reading for funny. And I think it's becoming true of games as well, if we substitute worth playing. And I'll say 3 instead of 2, because it seems to work out that way. And of course, we're ignoring all those jokes, books, games that aren't even worthwhile once. So this statement applies particularly to modern games, both video games and tabletop games. Enjoyable once, enjoyable thrice, or enjoyable always. Well, nowadays we have more than 3,500 tabletop games published a year and tens of thousands of video games. I have read recently that there are 500 new video games a day on the Apple Store. It's much, much, much easier to self-publish than in the past, especially for video games. Well, AAA video games have always tended to be one and done. I beat the game and then I don't play anymore. That's because they're really puzzles more than games. They often have always correct solutions, and once you figure out the solution, why would you play anymore? But tabletop games are leaning the same way. And not many of them are a case of I beat the game, though there is that. It's mostly the cult of the new. Most games are played just a few times before everyone moves on to the next one. And this is exacerbated when there are more and more new games. So I think we've come to the point that most games are designed to meet the lower standard of play 3 times or play once. They're not designed so that they're always worth playing. And there are lots of exceptions, but I'm talking about typical games. You might ask yourself then, why don't more people call out these weak games? Well, partly they're satisfied with it because the cult of the new, they want to go on to the next one. But we also have something that might be called a Kickstarter effect. Heavily hyped games build up a credit. And once people have bought in on that, they don't want to admit that the game's not very good. Young people especially feel that they need other people to validate their likes. So they campaign in favor of what they like. And they campaign against what they don't like or against anyone who doesn't like what they like. So the hype increases. I don't like Euro games in general because I think they're puzzles and they're not interesting. And when I say that, many people over the course of years have tried really hard to convince me that I ought to like them. And until recently, I did not understand why they bothered, because they weren't going to convince me. And it's because that need for personal validation, somebody who doesn't like them is in effect an attack on their own preferences, and so they try to convince that person otherwise. Now, older generations, and I'm a baby boomer, tend to have more belief in their own preferences, and they don't feel the need to campaign for or against a particular thing. But the result of all this is there's less actual analysis of games and more emotional us and them, and that's magnified, of course, by the internet, whether it's Board Game Geek, or Kama Sutra, or somewhere else. Those people who let themselves be sold on a game before it's released, before they really know much of anything about it, are emotionally invested in the success of the game, so they're less likely to criticize it once it's in their hands. I think that's sad, but that seems to be the way it is. And as long as there are enough buyers for enjoyable once or enjoyable thrice, that's going to be the standard that many people design to. After all, it's easier to design games that way. You don't have to worry about putting gameplay depth into the game. You don't have to worry about replayability. You can design the game to be transparent, that is, so that people can figure out how to play well after playing once. That's not how deep games used to be designed. It's party and family game design, but that's what's happening in hobby games, in my view. And that's where the market is. How many people do you know who study individual games in order to play better? Not many, I'll bet. Most people don't even want to read the rules these days. So it's not surprising the overall quality of games for serious players is decreasing. But the market is short, simple, easy to digest games, what I call bagatelles. We can play a few times and give up. And once again, it's easier to design a game to that standard. Also, more and more people are treating games as time killers. And if a game's a time killer, it doesn't need to be always good to play, because there's always more games. So you can play a game once, kill some time with it, then play a different game once, kill some time with it, then play a different game once, kill some time with it. After all, somebody else is teaching you how to play. You don't have to invest any time to learn. It's easy. As long as the individual game isn't too long, of course. And what too long is varies. I recently was at a Game Designer Guild meeting and told people that I designed a game that was more or less a filler, about an hour long. And they said, oh no, fillers now are 15 to 20 minutes. An hour is not a filler anymore. And so it's not surprising so many games are shallow and lack substance. There's just not much there. Now, the question is, what standard are you working toward as a designer? I want to design games that are always worth playing. But a few games that I've designed, I recognize, are not going to be that kind of game, but they're short, they're easy to play, and that's what some people want.